In the golden heart of the Ottoman Empire, behind the rose gardens of Topkapi Palace, behind silk drapes and eunuch-guarded doors, existed a world built not on love, but on obedience and fear. A world where a single misstep, a whisper, or even a glance could end in torture, drowning, mutilation, especially if you were a woman. Because within the imperial harem, that hidden palace of hundreds of concubines, wives, slave girls, and rival mothers, survival meant silence, and punishment meant pain so horrifying it was never spoken aloud again. The Ottomans, rulers of a vast empire for over 600 years, were masters of not just war, but control. They knew that power didn't come from the sword alone. It came from fear. Their punishments were meant to make examples. Public executions, mass impalements, forced drownings, all designed to crush the soul, not just the body. And for women inside the palace and for concubines, slaves, even mothers of sultans, the rules were different, more invisible, more terrifying. They were not always executed in the open square. Their pain was secret, buried under marble, sealed behind walls, sunk to the bottom of the Bosphorus. Historical Case 1, Sultan Ibrahim's Madness, the drowning of 280 concubines. In 1648, the Sultan Ibrahim, first known in Ottoman records as Ibrahim the Mad, received a rumor. One of his concubines, he was told, had been unfaithful. No one knew who. No names were given. And so to cleanse the entire harem, he gave a single order. Drown them all. That night, 280 women, many of them young girls brought from Europe and North Africa, were bound and taken in silence to the Bosphorus Strait. Eyewitnesses, including palace eunuchs, later described the shore as a graveyard of bodies, washing up like driftwood. None were formally charged. None had a trial. Their only crime, being women in the empire of a paranoid king. This was not the only time the harem became a house of execution. Women who tried to escape, speak out, or manipulate court politics were punished with death by suffocation, wrapped in carpets and beaten until silent. Others were imprisoned in windowless rooms for years, the golden cages, where they lost their minds in darkness. Some were poisoned slowly, their food laced by rival factions. And eunuchs, ever loyal to the sultan, carried out each act without question, because mercy was not part of imperial duty. But perhaps most terrifying of all was the punishment known only in hushed palace whispers, the silken cord. It was how the Ottomans killed without spilling noble blood. A long silk sash wrapped around the neck of a woman or prince, pulled from behind by two deaf-mute executioners. She wouldn't scream, she couldn't, because the guards assigned to carry it out had no tongues. They were trained to hear nothing, speak nothing, only obey. Punishment in the Ottoman world was not random, it was symbolic. The female body was both sacred and expendable. Sultans built their power on beauty, but enforced it with blood. Even mothers of future sultans were forced to compete, and sometimes kill, to secure their child's right to the throne. The same harem that gave life could just as quickly take it. This was the reality behind the silk curtains of Topkapi, an empire that dazzled the world with mosques, jewels, and poetry, but ruled through horror no one was allowed to name, where women disappeared without graves, where silence was the law, and punishment was the only way to survive. The imperial harem was more than a home. It was a political battlefield, a psychological prison, and for many women, a house of ritualized torture. While the outside world imagined silk-clad concubines lounging in rose-scented baths, the truth was far more brutal. Punishment here was not just about pain. It was about control, shame, and silence. And the methods were designed to scar not just the body, but the soul. Within the hidden depths of the palace were rooms known only to eunuchs and executioners, tiled chambers where punishment could be carried out in secrecy. There, rebellious concubines or suspected spies were taken, not to be killed, but to be broken. Hot irons were heated over coals. Skin was burned in patterns, often not to kill, but to mark forever. These were called discipline burns, a common form of torture in the 16th and 17th centuries for female slaves who disobeyed harem law. One particularly horrifying punishment recorded by the 17th century European observer Ogier Ghiselin de Busbecq involved the flaying of skin from the soles of women's feet, followed by forcing them to walk on salt-soaked floors. Screams would echo but never reach the marble walls outside. because the palace was built like a trap. Thick walls, narrow halls, no witnesses. And the eunuchs who administered these punishments, often themselves were once castrated boys, now reshaped into tools of the empire. Another method used to punish concubines suspected of betrayal was the cage ritual. A small iron or wooden cage barely big enough to sit in. Women were locked naked inside, sometimes for days. No food, no water. They were left in the sun, or worse, the cold, and the goal wasn't just physical pain. It was madness, humiliation, to destroy pride and make sure the victim never defied the harem hierarchy again. There were also fire rituals, not executions, but tortures involving flame. One punishment involved singeing a woman's hair until her scalp blistered, then rubbing in ash and salt. Others had hot coals pressed to the thighs, enough to cripple a dancer or render a favorite concubine useless. It was a reminder beauty was power and could be taken away with a single order from the valid sultan or eunuch-in-chief. Sometimes the punishment was psychological, a slow erosion of identity. Women accused of disobedience were renamed, stripped of their old titles, and banished to the old halls. Dim, forgotten wings of the harem where only the disgraced were sent. There they aged alone, exiled from music, warmth, or light. They called it living burial. No one visited them. No one spoke their names again. Some went mad. Others took their own lives. And yet even worse was what happened to those who gave birth to sons, potential heirs, but lost the political game. If their sons were strangled, as many Ottoman princes were, the mothers were sometimes forced to witness the executions as a final act of submission. And if they protested, they were silenced by the silken cord, by poison, or by vanishing into the dungeons beneath Topkapi where no records were kept. These tortures were never formally written in law because they didn't have to be. The palace operated on custom, on fear, on whispered orders. Punishment wasn't about justice. It was about purity, obedience, and control of the female body. The sultan was the shadow above all, but inside the harem, it was often women themselves who ordered the punishments. Rival mothers, jealous concubines, and especially the valid sultan, the mother of the reigning sultan, ruled with terrifying authority. She could order a whipping, a branding, even a quiet death. And once it was done, it was never discussed again. The empire projected grandeur, golden domes, Quranic justice, and civilized law. But beneath it all lay a dark truth, a system where torture was sacred and punishment was theater. The harem wasn't a paradise, it was a chessboard. And the pieces were flesh and fire. She began as a Greek slave, brought into the harem as a gift. But she would rise to become the most powerful woman in Ottoman history. Kosem Sultan controlled the throne for decades, acting as regent for her sons and grandsons. But behind her veils and poetry was a mind of steel, and a reputation for cold, merciless punishment. She understood what the empire demanded: obedience, legacy, and control. To protect her sons and secure her bloodline, she did what male rulers had done for centuries. She killed. But because she was a woman, every execution came draped in ritual and silence. She didn't raise a sword. She gave the nod, and a eunuch would appear with a silk cord. Her most infamous act came in the 1650s, when her own grandson, Sultan Mehmed, became the puppet of a rival faction. Kosem saw her power slipping, so she plotted to replace him with another grandson, one more loyal to her. But the plan was uncovered, and in a twist of bitter irony, the woman who had once ruled the palace was betrayed by her own daughter-in-law, Turhan Sultan. Kosem was strangled in the very palace she had ruled for 40 years. But her legacy and her cruelty would echo for generations. During her rule, political enemies didn't just disappear. They suffered, especially the women who threatened her bloodline. Concubines rumored to be carrying a rival's child were quietly removed. Some were poisoned in their food. Others were sent to distant provinces where they died mysteriously within weeks. There are even whispers, though never confirmed in official records, of concubines forced into accidental miscarriages through beatings and herbal poisons. Her control extended into the imperial nursery. The practice of fratricide, the killing of royal brothers, had long been part of Ottoman succession, but Kosem is believed to have revived it at a time when the empire flirted with ending the bloodshed. She argued that the state could not afford civil war, so the young sons of sultans, sometimes only infants, were smothered in their sleep. Not with blades, but with pillows, soft, silent, ritualistic. A eunuch did it, always at night, always under orders. But perhaps the most disturbing punishments weren't public at all. Kosem ruled the harem like a kingdom, and betrayal, even suspicion of betrayal, meant isolation, mutilation, or death. One account describes a young Circassian concubine who caught the attention of the Sultan. Kosem, fearing a shift in favor, had her face disfigured. Acid or heated oil, no one knows. The girl lived, but never danced again. She was sent to the old palace, unseen, unnamed. This was Kosem's true power. She used the very architecture of the palace as her weapon. The maze-like halls, the secret doors, the eunuch networks. It was said she knew every whisper, every letter, every late-night movement. Even after her death, the culture of feminine cruelty she helped shape endured. The harem became less a paradise, more a battleground, where women were pawns, queens, and executioners. And it wasn't just Kosem. The Ottoman imperial system made women's power contingent on survival, and survival meant eliminating rivals. Mothers turned on daughters-in-law. Sisters betrayed sisters. Because in the harem, love was a liability, and power demanded blood. This is not a tale of men. This is a tale of women who learned to rule by mastering pain. There were no dungeons in Topkapi. No iron chains, no bloody racks, no screams echoing through stone walls. Because in the Ottoman Empire, the most terrifying punishments were done in silence and in beauty. Pain didn't need to be loud. It needed to be erased. This was a court that understood performance. A whisper from a sultan, a nod from a valid sultan, a glance from a chief eunuch. These could seal a person's fate. And the execution wouldn't happen in the streets. It would happen behind gold-embroidered curtains, under domed ceilings, in rooms scented with rosewater and incense. One of these chambers was the infamous Chamber of Execution in Topkapi. Decorated with exquisite Iznik tiles and Quranic verses, it was beautiful, almost holy. But this is where princes were strangled. Their bodies carried away silently through a gate of felicity, the same gate used for royal coronations. A death chamber, disguised as a throne room. The executioners were mute, literally. They were called bostanshi, royal gardeners, trained to kill without speaking, without emotion. Many were deaf or had their tongues removed, because words meant memory, and memory was dangerous. Their preferred weapon? A silk bowstring, because spilling royal blood was forbidden. So they choked life out of their victims, slowly, cleanly, almost ritually. The method was so silent that sometimes the victim's scream never left their throat. Women, too, disappeared this way. Concubines who broke harem rules, who committed adultery, who threatened political order. They didn't face public floggings. They were given a bowl of poisoned sherbet, sweetened with sugar, laced with death. If they refused, they were strangled and their bodies quietly buried in the palace gardens or distant cemeteries. Even eunuchs who once acted as jailers were not safe. Those who overstepped, who grew too powerful, were quietly dismissed. Or worse, they were sewn alive into leather bags and thrown into the Bosphorus. No trial, no funeral, just silence. The Ottomans understood the power of removal, not spectacle. Unlike the Europeans who made punishment a public theater, with racks, wheels, and burnings, the Ottomans made it invisible, private, untraceable. A culture of secrets enforced by architecture, ritual, and fear. This is why the Topkapi Palace still feels haunted. Not by ghosts, but by the absence of noise. No blood on the tiles, no screams in the air, just whispers in the marble. Even today, tourists walk the harem halls admiring the art, unaware they are standing in the exact spots where women died, where boys were strangled, where history was rewritten with a cord instead of a quill. Pain does not always roar. In empires like the Ottomans, it wears silk, it smells of jasmine, and it leaves no trace.